Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and today I want to talk about violence in tabletop role playing games. And I'm also going to talk about violence in movies as well because I think it's a related subject. I may get into sort of the idea of message versus content, but I was reading an article, and let me make sure I get the title right. It was Dungeons and Dragons and the Ethics of Imaginary Violence by Clem Bastow. And I was reading it because I was just going online Googling the subject of violence in D&D, violence in role-playing games. I make violent role-playing games, so I was just kind of curious about some of the discussions that are out there. I participated in the past in some of the forum discussions on this subject, but I hadn't really paid attention to the topic in the I don't know, maybe the past year or two, because I just those kind of discussions I just have maybe not been they haven't been on my radar as much. So the article is fairly interesting. I will link to it. Parts of it I agree with, parts of it I don't. But I think it's a fairly measured article. It's not like a some of the articles I was encountering out there that were maybe had an axe to grind or something. This was sort of more of an exploration of the topic. I might quibble over some aspects of it. There's a section in there where they talk about a good DM will be will have a more morally gray world. I like morally gray settings, but I don't think that's a hallmark of a good GM. I think it's just a choice that you make for your campaign. So, but anyways, I also was sort of looking online and seeing what people were saying about the idea of violence in role playing games, and I was a little surprised that there seems to be, I don't know, kind of like a backlash against the idea of games featuring combat as a resolution to challenges. It's not huge. I just found a few discussions on it, and some people came at it from different angles. So I think that there's, like anything else, it's not like it was all monolithic. I think if but I did see a lot of discussions calling for more nonviolent approaches to role playing games, and I don't know. To me, I think that's kind of stupid. I think if you're doing it because it's fun and interesting, that's great. I think that's if you think that violence is boring, like players pulling out their sword first thing is a boring thing to do, and you would rather see them maybe parlay or come up with clever solutions. So you're building a game that maybe rewards that or something. I think that's different. But I think if you are taking moral, like you're taking like umbrage to the fact that people like to kill orcs or that a game like D&D rewards you for swinging your sword from time to time. I don't know. I think that's a little misguided, and I think that it's when I look at role players, right? When like I know a lot of different kinds of people, but when I look at role players, tabletop role players, there's a lot of different things you can say about them, and there are many criticisms you can level at at those of us who play role playing games. I'm sure that I certainly have some qualities that are stereotypical gamer qualities that that I would have to admit to. But one of the qualities I almost never see among gamers is a tendency towards violence. And I know a lot of different kinds of people. My friends are not all gamers. I know types of people that maybe are more prone to violence. I live in the Boston area, so I know folks that, if a dispute arises, that's sort of their go-to tool. But they don't play D&D. None of those people play D&D. And I guarantee you, if they did, I think their violent edge would soften because I think they'd blow off some of that steam that they have pent up, by killing goblins and just getting it out of their system in a safe way. So for me, I really like violent movies. I love role playing games that feature combat. I was originally going to talk about Goodfellas today. I just woke up. That's why I look a little groggy, and I was going to talk about Goodfellas. But I was kind of surfing around following these discussions, and so I decided to maybe weigh in a little bit. And again, as always, I apologize if I'm not maintaining a consistent strain of thought here. I like to just kind of turn the camera on, let it roll, and I don't really edit the videos. I just let them run. So, but but I think there's also a danger, like, I've noticed discussions as well, and these I've participated in. I've seen these because these have been going on for a few years. This idea that the evil orc is this bad thing. That if you have an evil orc in your campaign, that it stands in for other groups of people, and that it means you want to do harm to them, or that we're maybe not quite that extreme, but the argument is something like if that we're sort of othering people through the orcs. The orc is a stand-in for different minorities or whatever, for terrorists or whatever group you happen to dislike. And so having that black and white moral universe that the characters exist in promotes black and white moral thinking. And I just don't buy that. I can enjoy a movie with very black and white ethics and morals. That doesn't mean that I'm going to apply those to my everyday life. I'm a complicated human being. I can carry more than two thoughts in my head at once. I think that that I understand that there's a difference between a world created by a GM that's meant to sort of answer a thought experiment on what would a world look like where you have objective morality, where you have forces of good and forces of evil. What would that look like? That doesn't mean that I think I have that's a reflection of the GM's actual beliefs or my beliefs. I can enjoy that cuisine without thinking that it has to reflect my inner ideology. I think really where this kind of comes from is I've noticed a lot of folks when they go to movies, when they see movies and they talk about movies, when they play games, they talk about games, they kind of want to have, and I see this on the left and the right, so I don't think this is like a left-right issue, but I see a lot of people that maybe are leaning one way or the other strongly. They tend to sort of do this where they want the content to match their belief system. So if they're liberal and don't believe in violence, they want a movie that reflects that. If they're conservative and they think that they like strong national defense and all that stuff, they want movies that reflect that. And I just think that's the worst way to approach consuming media. And I think that that's what kind of leads people down this path of evil orcs are bad, stark and black and white morality in games is bad. It's this idea that that's how everybody is engaging this material. That's how people ought to be engaging this material. I think most people are smart. Most people can draw a distinction between an evil orc in the game and the real world. And most people can watch a movie where there's a lot of bloodshed and violence and not want to shed blood in reality. I think it's cathartic to experience that. I think it actually helps. But also, I think I just am very skeptical of any kind of moral panic. I remember, again, the 80s where people were saying D&D was bad because it was, violent and satanic and everybody was going to worship Satan. And so I'm just always skeptical of those kinds of claims. But also, I think in the case of the evil orc, I don't think it's a stand-in for minority groups or people that, that or produces this model of some people are okay to hurt, some people aren't. If we're at war with another country or something. I think what it does is it's a stand-in for the idea of the henchman. And if you look at a movie, like Enter the Dragon or Kill Bill or any violent movie where you have to have where it's action focused and therefore body's got to drop. You need the henchman. You need the person who it's okay to kill it's okay for the hero to kill, so that you can have this endless stream of action. People understand the conceit. People aren't stupid. They know that in reality you can't do that, and they know that in reality the henchman's probably a much more complex person. That it's not so black and white as it is in the film. Or in the game or what have you. And so the orc is just a stand-in for that because you need it in order to have the endless cycle of violence in the game. But I don't think it produces the kinds of thinking where people are inclined to violence. I said this before, gamers are not by and large violent people. I know a lot of different types of folk, and the gamers I know, they're just not, they're not the sort of individuals that will will even think of violence as a first option. So I don't. I just really can't buy this idea that a steady diet of D&D has led people to be excessively violent. When I think of how meek most gamers are that I know, I mean, it's just not. It's just not a reflection of. It's not a reflection of any kind of reality that I've seen. And also, when I think of gamers, even in terms of their political beliefs, they're so all over the map. I just don't think that the game itself has that much of an impact on things. Now that said, I always think, in terms of at the actual table, if people are uncomfortable for any reason, that's a whole different story. I do think that when you have a group of people together, just like when you're doing anything, whether you're going out to eat, whether you're watching a movie, whether you're playing poker, if somebody in the room's uncomfortable because of something other people are doing, that needs to be addressed and it has to be resolved in some way. And you need to be, you know, good friend to everybody at the table. So I think if for whatever reason somebody doesn't like you know, you know, if a campaign is getting too violent for one person's taste, that's an individual thing that would be handled by an individual group. It's not something that I think is the responsibility of the game designer of the book to resolve for you in advance. That's a complicated, very individual sort of thing that the social group kind of has to manage. So yeah. So again, I'm sorry to go off topic, but yeah, and I think there's this other idea of I had mentioned before people want the content to match their ideology. Just because the content doesn't match your ideology, it doesn't mean that the message doesn't. I have three movies here because I was originally going to talk about Goodfellas. I have Goodfellas, which is my favorite movie in the world. I have Star Trek Troopers, which is another sort of violent movie against bugs in space, and I have 300, which is like sort of a heroic bloodshed but done in ancient Greece, and it's got. I think you could debate the message of the film, but I think a lot of people would see it as maybe more right-leaning than some of the other movies in here. And so my point with bringing up these three examples is these are all very violent movies. They're very violent, but they all have very different messages. The content is all, fairly equally violent, I would say. Goodfellas maybe less so than the others because there's more story and plot development. But when it's violent, it's realistic, it's gritty, it's 300 is saying much more sort of over the top. So I think it kind of balances out because the death scenes in Goodfellas are real. They feel like real deaths. Goodfellas is not a pro mafia movie. It is not a pro cocaine selling movie. It's about and the thing that's interesting about Goodfellas is it's as immersive as it gets. It's as close to a role playing experience as you can have of playing a criminal because it puts you in the shoes of Henry Hill. It gets you to sympathize with Henry Hill. It gets you to go on the journey with him and root for him. You want him to succeed when they're doing the Lufthansa heist. You want them to to get away with burying Billy Bats. And then by the end of it, you realize, that this is maybe not somebody that you should have been rooting for. But even with being in the character's shoes, it's very clear if you pay attention to the movie that Scorsese is not at all endorsing what he's doing. That's why the scene is painted red in the background when they're burying Billy Bats. That's why there's all this sort of hellish imagery that is meant to show you that these characters are staining their souls with this behavior, and that's why when they kill Spider, the movie takes a shift and everything starts going really bad for Henry and his crew because it's a lifestyle that they pull you into in the movie and make it look glamorous, and then you see all the horribleness after the midway point. And again, Starship Troopers is another. It's obviously an anti-war movie, an anti-propaganda movie, but it's filled with violence. And one of his earlier movies, RoboCop, similar. And when that came out, people in the '80s there was this trend of labeling films fascist as a way of critiquing them. Even guys that I really like Roger Ebert, were doing it. And there were some movies that you could probably say were fascist, but RoboCop was not fascist. RoboCop was about as anti-fascist as you could get. And people again mistook the violent content for the message. 300, I think there's maybe more of an argument to be made that that the that the message is a little bit more right leaning, possibly. Personally, I think it's so over the top that even if that was the intent, it just doesn't. It's hard to take that message seriously because it's so over the top. But and I think this is a gorgeous movie. I think this is a great example of sort of using blood on the screen as sort of like as like paint on a canvas. And I don't necessarily agree with the message that is underlying the movie. I think it's such a gorgeous film that I still can appreciate it. And so, and again, that's kind of what I'm talking about. With I don't think the movie has to cater to what I believe. I'd kind of rather that a film challenge me a little bit. I just want to have a reaction. I want to when I go see a film. I want to feel something, and I want to have a sense of catharsis and a sense of being confronted with something that's interesting, and even if it's an idea that I don't necessarily agree with. So otherwise, I don't know. I just find if I go to a movie or if I play a role playing game, and it's basically just there to reaffirm my beliefs. To me, that's I don't know. That's boring. It's not entertaining at all. It's not exciting. Um, so yeah. So again, I will link to this article. It's a pretty interesting piece, I think. Again, I read a number of them this morning, and that was one that I thought was maybe a little more nuanced. Got a little bit more of the gray, and didn't really. I don't know. It wasn't so to one extreme or the other. Um, but I do think that again, there's nothing. I don't think there's anything wrong with violence in tabletop role playing games or violence in media in general. And I'm also very skeptical of the idea that you're going to fix society by fixing the media in society. Don't I just don't really buy into that. I think there are certainly uh, things that are content that I wouldn't want to consume, but I just don't think people are like computers that you can program that way. I think we're smarter than that, and I think that what happens when you censor, whether it's official censorship or whether it's just we're censoring things because they won't sell or something, but when you change the content to remove objectionable material, people just get more creative. They just learn to get more subtle about that stuff. It's still there. It's just more subtle. So again, you could remove the violence from the RPGs, and I think it's still going to work its way in passive aggressively. It's still going to be there. It'll just be under the surface, and you won't see it quite as much. Just like back when they had the production codes, where you couldn't have two couples in a bed together or whatever. They found ways to talk about sex. They found ways, and people will sometimes argue, oh, it was more creative, it was more interesting. I think that's BS. Because if you look at the explosion of movies after they removed those production codes, the '70s, when we had these, probably the peak period in the United States for like quality filmmaking, was after they removed all those codes and people started doing, having blood on the screen and having sex and having violence and having cursing and all these kinds of things that you weren't really supposed to have before. That unleashed our best films. So I mean, I like old movies. I like movies that were made, when there was more control of what was allowed. But I don't think that those are better movies, and I think that there are some movies that are better despite the fact that they had all these constraints and that they were creative in dealing with the constraints. But I think it's almost just objective. The '70s, you had better filmmaking, I think, and I think it was because of that. I think it was because there was this ability to do whatever you want, and that unleashed all this creativity. Um, so yeah. So again, I'm sort of jumping back and forth between role playing games and movies and stuff like that. But so yeah. So again, mostly what you see me do here is I talk about wuxia movies or I talk about role playing games, and I think the common thread between those two things is sort of the violence. Wuxia movies are all about turning violence into poetry, turning it into sort of something beautiful on screen, and I think that's I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that I I would be a little. I would probably roll my eye. Like a lot of wuxia movies have a very anti-violent message. I mean, anybody who's seen Killer Clans or seen The Last Hurrah for Chivalry or any of these movies that are really violent, you know that they're not pro-violent messages, especially something like Killer Clans, which is really sort of talking about the endless cycle of violence, like how violence leads to more violence. Um, so I think that again, don't confuse the content with the message. Don't assume even just because the message is maybe one that you're not on board with, unless something truly repugnant. But I mean, you know, I don't think it's healthy to only eat, you know, stuff that matches, the world you want. I think that you need to be challenged sometimes, and so uh, you know, I don't know if I've mentioned this in the videos before, but I was raised nonviolent. My parents were pacifists. Um, I like violent movies. I like boxing. I like sparring. I like the act of fighting. Um, but I don't carry that, with me when I'm walking around. Um, I think that you can, people again, people are complicated. People can have more than, you know one idea at a time in their head, and and again, my parents were pacifists. I wasn't allowed to have toy guns. I wasn't allowed to watch violent movies when I was a kid, but I still wanted to. I still found them interesting. So I think even if you try to clamp that down, you're just causing steam to build. You're just it's sort of like I forget what the term for it is. The return of the repressed. It's the return of the repressed. You're stifling something down that kind of needs expression, and if you don't allow for it, I think that's much worse than just kind of opening the genie's bottle on it. So all right, those are my thoughts. I'm sure some people. It's very early in the morning, and I've just been kind of talking and talking. So if I was unclear, feel free to ask me a question about my thoughts on the subject, or feel free to weigh in. Again, I'm not really gonna participate in the comments except to if there's like a question that I can answer or something like that. But I don't want to. I don't want people to feel like they can't say what's on their mind, and I don't want to. I don't want to feel obligated to reply to every point and counterpoint. So, all right, I will post this up this morning, and I will talk to you later.